At Quite the Thing Media, we aim to bring you the best podcasts produced by independent creators, made without constraints.
Podcast Father here. Join me on my journey as I start out as the indie podcaster.
You've been searching for a podcast. Want to know about some great artists? You've come to the right place. Indie Podcaster, with your host, the Podcast Father.
Welcome to this podcast, my podcast. It's called Indie Podcaster. I'm the Indie Podcaster on this journey starting out. I'm Jeff, a.k.a. Podcast Father. Mike Sago's with me.
What's up? This is my 10th appearance. How does it feel? We hit double digits. The audience is clapping right now. I can hear it. Maybe you'll edit it in. Maybe you won't, but in my head, it's there.
You're going to have to pay me. I'm going to pay them like you paid me, man.
I don't pay much.
Today's going to be a cool one. Not only do I personally, I call Jack Shaw a friend of mine, but he has a lot of credentials that he's built up in the podcasting game.
It's really cool, the things he's put together. QTT Media is really interesting to me. I've interacted with them a bunch on Twitter. I've been following it over this year since they've launched. The idea to start an independent podcast awards show is a really cool thing to me. If nothing else, it brings people together. It allows for some healthy, friendly competition. It gives some heavy plugs all over the place to cool podcasts who deserve it. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's interesting to me to see like that podcasts have become so big that we're building infrastructure around the podcasts. Like what kind of products and services will be there 5 years from now? And it feels like some forward thinking, and I'm here for it. It feels really modern. Also, I'm not a Rangers football fan. I know Jack is, but I'm a Rangers hockey fan from New York. So in a way, I feel like we're brothers in arms, you know?
We'll try to connect that. That might offend them, though. Yeah, it can count in your head, I guess. Oh, Mikey. Man, so no, you referenced the football, right? And the reason you did is because Jack and his friends are actually involved in the Heart and Hand podcast. That is the biggest Rangers football club podcast there is.
It's really good.
That's where Jack kind of starts, and I don't know, building upon being a part of a successful podcast. Then he springboards into long-term memory with his friend Colin. Colin's also in the other one, and then he launches Quite the Thing Media, which I'm a part of proudly. And then he's got like 5 other podcasts that he started out, man. And this guy is a legitimate.
He's working.
Yeah, he is. He's a legitimate player in the podcast game. And you touched on it earlier. Innovation. He's an innovative man. Big time.
He's just really, hustler has this weird connotation to it. I don't know if you feel that way, but grinding, just like putting in all this time on all these podcasts and growing them. And you see him stepping from one to the other, and they're both popular and doing this new QTT Media thing. It's just all very cool.
Hustler. I think of the magazines you probably have stuffed under your mattress, but no, I get your point. He is.
I was going to say The Hustler, the movie, which is much cleaner, but yours is funnier. So what are you going to do? He is
in the grind all the time. I probably annoy him. We talk so much podcast business, and I'll bring it up when we get into the business here, but there's a big award ceremony that you touched up on going down in a few days. So before we dive into this interview with Jack, let me talk about that and some other business. Myself and this podcast are proud members of Quite the Thing Media. Make sure you're checking out Quite the Thing Media. Go to quitethethingmedia.com. If you want to go to my personal site, it's actually at Quite the Thing Media. quitethingmedia.com/podcastfather. There you can request to be on this podcast as a guest. Also, a review from me on site. Make sure you're checking out all the great original podcasts on site and the independent creators on site. quitethingmedia.com. Couldn't do this podcast without the hosting platform, Captivate FM. Captivate FM is great, guys. I can't tell you how great it is. I could talk about it all day, but I will tell you one thing. For me, as a new podcaster, it's amazing. There's all sorts of tools, growth labs, etc. The team is so hands-on at Captivate FM. They will help you through your journey. If you're a podcaster or content creator, you want to distribute your stuff, go to CaptivateFM.com. They'll go ahead and give you 7 free days off the bat. But I'll tell you what, if you go to my Quite the Thing Media page, quitethingmedia.com/podcastfather, there at the bottom, you'll find an affiliate link. You can get 30 days of Captivate FM free. Why wouldn't you check it out? Captivate FM. This podcast is sponsored by Good Pods, my great friends at Good Pods. This is an amazing app, guys. You get on there, you see what podcasts your friends and influencers are listening to. Download the Good Pods app. All the music on this podcast is from the artist Young Carts. Young Carts, great independent artist. You got to check out all the work. Go to the site, youngcartsbeats.com. If you want to contact me, you can find me on Twitter at podcast_father, or the podcast actually has an account too at indie_podcaster, or good old fashioned email, always great too, thepodcastfather@gmail.com. You want to support this podcast? One great way you can do for me is you can go onto your favorite podcast listening platform, may that be an Apple or Good Pods, and give me a rating. Throw me a 5-star. Type some nice things to me. If you don't even want to type, don't worry about it. Just throw me some stars. Any feedback is appreciated. I really do appreciate it. If you want to get real crazy and support me, you can always buy me a coffee. Check it out on my Quite the Thing media page. That's enough for the business. Let's get to the view. Joining me today is my good friend. He is my brother from another UK mother, is Jack Shaw. What's going on, man?
Yeah, I am great. I am excited to be on here speaking to you, Jeff. You know, we speak quite a lot on Twitter and stuff like that, which is quite common. But yeah, I'm looking forward to having an actual conversation with you. So yeah, let's get into it.
And it's interesting because a lot of people for a while thought we were the same person for whatever reason. I had people asking me if I was you, and you. Then when we first started talking, you're like, "That's funny," because people were asking me if I was you. So it went both ways there.
Yeah, I had one or two people. I had close friends, you know, Colin, that is my co-founder at Quite the Thing Media.
Yeah.
Even he said to me, "I don't believe that you're not podcast father." And I went, "I don't. I've got lots of stuff going on, and you've created your brand, and you're doing what you're doing." I said to Colin, "I don't have time to do that and everything else that we're doing at the moment." So yeah, I don't really understand why people thought that, but it seems to be quite a common thing, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think it's a testament to the fact that we get along so well now. That must say something. We must have something in common. Except for I don't say cheers after the sentence. So
yeah,
that was kind of the difference to me.
That's the big thing. Just that one word. Cheers. Yeah.
Exactly. So this interview with you is exciting to me because not only we obviously involved Quite the Thing Media, you got me on board there, and I appreciate that, but because you do have a past in podcasting, and we've never really talked about the beginning of it and pieced the whole thing together. So I'm excited to have that conversation.
Yes, well, I kind of done it backwards. Like you'll get a lot of podcasts, you will see they put out a few episodes and then give you a Patreon link and ask you for money. I started hosting and producing my own show on a Patreon network about 4 or 5 years ago. It's all about football or soccer in the USA, about the team that we support in Glasgow, Scotland, which is Rangers FC. And all I really wanted to do was speak about one of my passions in life, which is football. And Davey, who runs it, kind of put out a call to arms, basically, when he started the Patreon. If you want to do a podcast, send me a file, and if I like it, I'll put it out. So I sent him a 7-minute file about a player called Russell Latapy. And before I knew it, he'd put it out the next morning, and I didn't know it popped into my podcast player, and I heard myself for the very first time doing a podcast without knowing it. And it's kind of went from there. I have produced and hosted about 400 different episodes on Patreon, and maybe since going public with Wrong Term Memory and Quite the Interview, another 100 or so. So I would say about 500 different episodes over the last 5 years. So you've been doing it a long time, really enjoy it, and yeah, it's fun, man. It gives me something to do other than walk the dog and go to real work where I make real money, because I definitely don't make money doing this.
And it makes me laugh when some people get into it thinking they're going to have like an immediate payoff or payoff at all. That's far stretched, honestly, to imagine or even picture. But some people do think that.
Don't get me wrong. I 100% think that independent creators should get paid for their content. If you produce music, you get paid for it. If you produce an independent television show, you get paid for it. podcasting is a couple of years behind that, in my opinion. You should still get paid, but don't think you can jump into the market and start getting paid straight away. Try, don't get me wrong, try if you want, but you're going to come up against a brick wall. I'll give you a quick stat here. The Patreon network I work for releases a free weekly show. That gets 100,000 listens per show. It's got 5,000 subscribers on Patreon. So that's 5% of people willing to pay. And that took 4 years to get to that point. Unless you have, I would say 5,000 listeners, and then you might be able to get 5-10 people willing to pay.
Right.
It might put you off podcasting, basically, if you put stuff out there and within a week or a month nobody wants to pay for it. That's just the way the market is. People are so used to getting podcasts for free, basically.
They really have to be super consumers, super, that's what you call it, I guess, in marketing, but super fans to do that, which not everybody listening to a podcast is a diehard, would pay anything to listen to. So that shows that you at least do have some engagement. But what about, so did you start out, was Colin on that in the beginning? Explain your guys' friendship. You guys do a lot of stuff together.
Well, I have known Colin for 20 years, but he was in a sort of different group of friends. So I was friends with Gordon. Nobody knows him, but I'm going to tell you his name, Gordon. Gordon was friends with somebody who was friends with him, and we would come across each other occasionally at parties, at nights out, X, Y, and Z. Then I started doing the podcast on Patreon, and Colin was a patron. So he was paying for the content. He heard my voice, recognised my name, and then sent me a message and said, "Jack, is that you that's doing, it's called Rangers Bet Remembers. Is that you doing the Rangers Bet Remembers podcast?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I've always wanted to get into podcasting." I said, "Okay, I will speak to Davey, the owner, and say that you kind of want to come on." So Colin eventually came on, and after about 30 of my shows doing it by myself, Colin sort of got on board and we started creating together. So we've been creating together for about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years. Yeah, lots of fun, man. He's a good guy, and we sort of split the workload, which is something that you need to do if you're creating as much as us, because he's got his own 2 shows on there. Wow. I've got 2 shows and 2 episodes, 4 episodes, plus the public stuff. So we're podcasting 3 or 4 times a week together. Without that splitting workload, there would be absolutely no point.
You guys have that chemistry, I'm going to say, would indicate that you've been friends for at least 20 years. It just seems like it, which is a good thing. I mean, that's what makes the podcast work.
Yeah, it does. And we were lucky when we launched our public podcast, Long Term Memory, that we already had I hate using this term, fans. We already had a fan base. We already had people listening to the Patreon, and we managed to pull over a couple of hundred of them. So when we launched, we were getting decent numbers. You were moving up the charts. You were kind of getting into the top 20 in improv or whatever. And that was a driver, because I think if I hadn't have done the Patreon stuff and then launched a podcast, and after a month or 2, the numbers weren't great, it might have put me off, because I'll be honest, I like the feedback. I like the conversations that I have with people that are listening, and that's kind of why I do it. If there wasn't that there, and there wasn't that link between myself and who was listening, I would probably have chucked it a long time ago, Jeff, and just gave it up, to be perfectly honest with you.
As a child or youth, did you have these visions where you grabbing an old-fashioned tape recorder? I mean, it had to come from somewhere.
I did used to have one of the old tape recorders. I'm 36, so you're talking nearly 30 years ago. So you could click record, you could record things, and I used to like sort of playing about with the fast forward and rewind buttons to make yourself sound a little bit different. I also was part of the drama class in primary school. So we would put on, every now and again, you would put on an Easter play or a Christmas play. And I was part of that. I always quite liked being the centre of attention. And even back when I was 10 or 11 in the the Christmas pantomime that we done. I was old Mother Hubbard and Jack and the Beanstalk. So I was the dame, they call them, in panto. So I dressed up as a lady. I was centre of attention. I had all the jokes. And it's something that I've really not thought about until you asked me that there, basically. I've always kind of liked being the joker, the centre of attention. So maybe it sort of stems from that as a youth, Jeff. Yeah.
It's funny because you're talking about that tape. I'm trying to remember what I had, the exact same one in Home Alone. Remember that movie?
Yeah, I didn't have the Home Alone one that was the funny shape. It was like the square with the two bits at the side. I didn't have that one. My dad was a journalist, and before iPhones and before all that sort of stuff, to record a conversation, you would have a portable tape recorder. So it was one of them. It was just, and it wasn't even like a full-size cassette tape you would put in it. It was like the little mini ones that you would put in. So my dad did that. He retired from journalism, and I kind of stole that and started using that. Yeah, but it wasn't the one from Home Alone that you had. Yeah, it wasn't the same one.
That was a badass one, though. The one from
It was pretty badass. Yeah,
I don't remember what it was called. I'm gonna have to do a little bit more looking back and research on that. Anyway, so you use the platform that you had with the soccer club over there, and you get long-term memory. You get some fans over from there. When did you start kind of coming up with this idea of long-term memory, and talk about the concept of it and how you came to that?
Behind the Patreon, I presented a show called Rangers Bet Remembers, where I used to look back at history, and it used to be all about soccer, and then eventually it became just more about looking back at history, strange facts, things that people might not know, things that you might tell somebody that kickstarts a memory. But a lot of the time, myself and Colin would be having this conversation on the podcast, and we would get things wrong. And on Patreon, there is a comment section below your episode. And a lot of the time, a lot of people would be commenting saying, oh, that's not true what you said, it is this. And it kind of became a bit of a thing that myself and Colin, we would try our hardest, but we would get things wrong trying to remember them. And that's where long-term memory comes from. We will try our hardest, and we want to teach people things. We're not educators, but at the beginning of a long-term memory episode, we hope you leave at the end and you've maybe learned something that might not be true, to be honest, because we've got it wrong. But we're trying our hardest to create something that is vaguely interesting, because it is kind of the two guys chatting type of podcast that a lot of people don't like and have no time for, which is fair enough. But there's a little bit extra there, basically. There's facts in there if you want to try and search them out. So, yeah, we get things wrong, but we do try and teach, in inverted commas, use something new every episode, basically.
Did you get in, going back a little bit, I know I was pretty big into the internet 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, creating content, releasing it. Were you doing that early adulthood?
The only place that I ever released content on, again in inverted commas, was the app Vine. Do you remember that? The 7-second videos?
Yeah, I do. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant because done well, a 7-second video can brighten up your day, it can be funny, it can be touching. And I'm a little bit disappointed that Vine disappeared, because at my peak, in inverted commas, as a video content creator on Vine, I did have a couple of thousand followers, basically. There was a sort of, we've got the indie podcast world where everybody sort of kicks about together and shares and does that side of things. There was a sort of Glasgow-specific Vine culture, basically, where a lot of people, well, there was about 12 of us, all from Glasgow, doing sort of Glasgow-specific humour, Glasgow-specific videos. The thing about back then, when somebody shared that video, it would get interactions, it would get engagement, because it was 7 seconds. People watched it, seen it, and then they would follow you. Sharing podcasts is totally different, because you're asking people to take an hour, half an hour out of their time. But back when it was Vine, 7 seconds, people shared it. You're like, I had videos that were getting like 30, 40,000 views. People were seeing it, but that sort of fell apart. And I work in education, and my boss found out that I was doing videos, and some of them were pretty vile. Some of the shit I was saying was very Glasgow specific, and my boss found out and said, like, you can't really be doing that. But like, there's nothing in your contract to say that you can't, but you're an educator, basically. So don't be saying that online where students might find you. And students did find me, and I did have a stalker very early on in my educational career and my Vine career, in inverted commas. So I had a bit of a weirdo start following me about. So changed my name online, don't use my real name nowadays, never going to, just in case people find me. And I'm not keen on that, because I'm not saying it's dangerous, but there needs to be, in my profession, a split between the professional and the client, basically. So yeah, again, Vine being the centre of attention, but you're drilling down deep here, Jeff, and pulling out thoughts and feelings that I didn't ever think about until now, to be honest.
That's what I do, man. No,
Good.
I agree with you, though. I'm not big on, and you know that, I'm not hiding, but my name's Jeff, but I'm not going to go into great detail like some people do. I just don't think it's necessary for me to do the thing that I'm doing and do that. It's not necessary. So I agree with you.
Yeah, my name is Jack. That is my first name, and I use my mother's maiden name. It's my middle name that I use. I just don't use my last name because my last name's pretty specific. Like, it's not Smith or McDonald. Like, if you typed my name into Google, it would be me that comes up. Like, there's not a lot of people with my full name, so I decided to just get rid of my second name and use my mother's maiden name.
Sorry, I took you off track down the rabbit hole there.
No worries.
Tugging at your heartstrings. So long-term memory, you brought some fans over. We were talking about that. That worked out. And then you started having a vision about a podcast network. And how long ago was it that you started thinking about launching a network?
I've probably been thinking about the network for a few years, to be honest. Like, even before launching Long-Term Memory, I thought it would be pretty cool to have your own network of podcasts or podcasters and produce content, and eventually be able to take a bit of a back seat when it comes to the producing, basically, and the actual coming up with new content, and have other people to do that for you, basically. And I suppose that comes from Patreon, with Davey running that, and we have like 4 shows a day. So you're talking like 30 shows a week that come out. Davey is on like 5 of them. So there's 25 shows that other people are doing for him. He does pay people because he's making money. So that's kind of where that started, thinking to myself, right, I'll be honest, over time, eventually kind of make money for me. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be dubious about my actions. So decided to launch Quite a Thing Media. We're getting there, we've got new ideas. We're running a podcast awards. The ceremony is 31st of July. We're kind of looking to shine a light on independent podcasters for a start, but also grow the brand, grow the name, get out there. I'm not, like I say, going to sit here and kid on that I'm all about
the love.
All about the love, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is an end game, and hopefully we can move towards that over time, basically.
I know we have a lot of conversations. I harass you every day, probably annoy the dog shit.
I don't worry about it, man. No, I enjoy the conversations. I'm a bit of a chatter myself, yes.
But we do talk a lot of podcasting, podcast business, and I think that's why we kind of get along. But so I've asked you before how you came up with Quite the, and your answer is pretty simple because it goes with just about anything. Yeah.
Hopefully growing the brand, it goes with almost anything. So that was quite the football game I watched. That was quite the song I heard. That was quite the bit of food I had. It just goes. It's just a common term that you can almost put any word after. Quite the TV, quite the media, quite the podcast, quite the news, quite the XYZ. Do you want me to be honest with you? We were quite lucky. We sort of stumbled upon it because I had different, like, this is where Colin kind of comes into his own a little bit, because I want to get things done quickly. And I want to, if I've got an idea, I want to go, and try and do it as fast as we can. Colin is more methodical, and I can't even remember what I wanted to call the network before Quite the Thing Media, but it wasn't as good as that. And Colin eventually came up with that and sort of came up with the branding and X, Y, and Z. And once we decided to do more things like the collabs and Quite the Music and things like that, it just works. So in one sense, we were pretty lucky that Colin was there to just say to me, wait a minute, don't call it Colin and Jack Media. It wasn't that, but you know, just think about it for a little minute, and we just sort of stumbled upon it, and it just so happens to work for almost anything, which is lucky.
I do want to take another second here to talk about the sponsor of this podcast, Good Pods. Like I mentioned earlier in the intro, you can see what podcasts your friends and influencers are listening to. This app is great, and the creators and team Good Pods are very serious about making you the greatest listening experience for podcasts. Not only just the quality of the audio listening piece, but also the social aspect. This is a really awesome app. I can't suggest it enough. I'm very involved in there. They're very dedicated to podcasters, independent podcasters, and listeners. I have a couple groups on there you should go check out. The Indie Podcasters group, highlight indie podcasters, obviously. I've also recently created a true crime group. I'm a big true crime fan. You should join both of those groups. And every week, we do pick podcasts out of the Indie Podcasters group to highlight in the recommended section. But once again, I'll say it again, the Good Pods team is a great team of people. I can personally vouch for them, but they're also dedicated to making this app as good as possible. You can talk to them on social media directly. They will respond. They take all recommendations very serious. There's a great team at Good Pods. Make sure you download the Good Pods app and listen to your podcast there. Let's get back to the interview. I have a bunch of things I want to ask you and talk to you about, but how did you go about and approach the first couple of podcasts besides your own that you brought onto the network, the originals?
Right, okay. So I was a little bit of a spammer. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I went on to Chartable, the website, looked at the British Comedy Improv podcast chart, got people's emails from there and emailed like the sort of top 50, basically, and seen who got back to me, and a few people got back to me. And then we eventually got Mockbusters, who are on a bit of a hiatus at the moment, but they produce really high quality content. Cold Callers as well, who I also think are going to be going on a little bit of a hiatus soon. But those sort of two were the first to get back. They were podcasts similar in tone and content to Wrong Term Memory, but to get in contact with them, I did use nefarious means to find out their email address and get in contact, basically. So I used Chartable and sent a bunch of, I'll be honest, impersonal emails. Like, people will tell you not to do that, which is a fair enough comment. I sent the same email to, like I said, the sort of top 50. Got about 10 replies, and then eventually through conversations got the first couple on board.
You piece together a few other ones that are some really good podcasts too. Is that just social media? So you got Mockbuster, Cold Callers, great. Those are really good podcasts. Then you took to social media?
Social media was the big one, yes. Just getting the name out there, trying to get the brand out there at the beginning is something, as a person that has no background in marketing or anything like that, was a little bit difficult. So you go to social media, that's where people share things. We eventually got a few people contacting us, basically. Over time, people would say, look, we're a new podcast. Is there any chance we can come on the network? And my only sort of prerequisite to joining was sound quality and production, basically. So I didn't want it to sound like it was recorded on your phone or there's buses going past. I didn't want any of that. As long as there was a sort of decent production value to it. I was quite happy to get you on site and promote and sort of grow that way as a mutually beneficial type deal, where the podcast that came on would then share that they were part of Quite the Thing Media, and that was the sort of plan to launch, basically. And it kind of worked. We grew pretty quickly and got to about 10 or 12 podcasts within maybe 2 months or so. We had quite a few people on board and willing to share us as long as we shared them, basically.
It's interesting that you bring up this sound quality piece, because I think that's a big one. Not that a podcast needs to sound amazing, because mine will by no means be that. But this day and age, there's so many different avenues to create a podcast. There's apps that are doing it directly off of the app now, which is super cool and interesting, but it also comes with the caveat of lowering the quality of podcast. The more people you have doing it, obviously it's going to lower it. But when you make those kind of options available, it's going to lower it. So it's interesting that you say the sound quality piece is really the main thing that you're checking out.
Yeah, I didn't want people to have to struggle to listen to something, basically. Like, it's hard enough getting people to listen to an independent podcast without that specific podcast giving you earache almost, like, oh, there's too much noise going on, or that doesn't sound right, the volume is different, you have to turn it up and down. As long as that was fine, I was quite happy to basically engage with people.
We obviously met on social media, and that's how we've become friends in the podcasting community. And I took online, yes, as of this recording, which will come out later, but I talked about how much I've seen the hashtag indie podcast grow over the last couple of months. And it's a brand new thing to me. Obviously, you've maybe been in it a little bit longer than me. What are your thoughts on social media and podcasting, independent podcasting? Do you see it as a great benefit for listenership, or is it just engagement and networking? What do you use it for?
Yeah, I'll be honest here. The social sharing side of things, when it comes to listenership, is almost, I think, null and void. Don't get me wrong. Nobody is going to promote your podcast unless you do it. So unless you're putting it out there, nobody else is going to. Like, you're not paying somebody to do it. You can maybe lean on your friends a little bit at the beginning, but you can't constantly be asking people to put out your podcast. The hashtag FF, the only people that I think are following those hashtags are other independent podcasters. So you put an FF out, and the worst thing in the world is being tagged in an FF with 30 different at names in it. Like, I'm going to swear here, what is the fucking point? Like, what? Like, you're not giving me any incentive to go and follow, like, the people that you're putting in the FF. Is it just to get followers? And then after that, where do those followers, what do they do for you? Oh, they retweet stuff again. Do any of them listen? No. Do any of them click your links? No. Do you look at your Twitter engagements for something that is RT'd and shared 100 times, for example? If you actually drill down into the analytics of that on Twitter, you're lucky if you're getting 1% click rate. Waste of time. People aren't listening. People are then just following you back. You need to think about things more than that to boost your listenership. Like, it's okay having 6,000, 7,000 followers on Twitter and following 7,000 people, but there's no point. There's just no point, like, in my opinion. On long-term memory, you get 600 followers and we generally get about 600 listens an episode. I think that's more important, to have that engagement and have people actually following and listening. It's okay just following, but unless they actually go download your podcast and listen to you, is it just a vanity thing? I've got 7,000 Twitter followers. Well, you definitely don't have 7,000 people listening to your podcast each week. Like, you just don't. Like, you don't. I know you don't, because I can find you on listen notes. You know, like, I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to stuff like that. And sorry if I am pissing on people's cornflakes here, taking a shit in their slippers, but it's a Jeff, come on, it's kind of a waste of time. That's why I don't engage with it. I do not. I mute conversation straight away before the gifts start coming. Like, I can't. I can't stand it, mate. It's something that kind of boils my, to be honest with you.
Obviously, I brought it up for a reason, right?
Oh, yeah.
I knew we could have a legitimate conversation about it. I do want to say one thing. When you're saying FF for people listening, that's something like Follow Friday.
Yes.
Like we're recording on a Friday today. There's a lot of Follow Fridays going on there. And what you're alluding to is the fact that Follow Fridays are filled with and tagged on primarily, well, almost always, just podcasters.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the case of myself, several Follow Fridays right now that I've been tagged in, we're already all following each other. So there's a lot of notifications and all that to it. But I don't want to shit on the social media piece too much because it does have value, right? Like networking. You and I come in contact, not through a Follow Friday or anything like that. But the real networking piece, it does play a role in social media. So it does have its benefit. It doesn't necessarily translate to listens. You're right, because you have a long-term memory. It has, like you said, 500-600 followers. By no means even close to your own personal account. But you have some of these podcasts that might have 5, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 followers that may get not even 100. And most of it's like you said earlier. You said earlier yourself, you run a podcasting network, but you're busy just like everybody else. You don't have time to just listen to every podcast.
But there's the benefit in what you're doing on quiteathingmedia.com/podcast, Farah. You're creating value, Jeff, like, because you listen to the podcasts and you then write a review about them. And what that does is it gives people an incentive to go and listen to what you've listened to. It's not just a case of putting 20 podcasts in front of people, because finding podcasts for me is a very personal thing. I do it by myself. I go on to Apple Podcasts. I've got an iPhone. I scroll through. I look at the artwork. I look at the show description. And if something pops out to me, I click it and listen to it. I have honestly never, I'll be honest, listened to a podcast on the recommendation of Twitter. There we are. Sorry, I haven't. Just never done it.
At least you're being honest, and that's why I asked you that question, because I knew you would be honest. It's important to be honest.
If you say to me, word of mouth, if you say, Jack, go and listen to True Crime Garage, I've done that. I've queued up a few episodes of that because it is a very personal recommendation. It's word of mouth. If Colin says to me, go and listen to This American Life, I will go and listen to that. Or if he says, go and listen to a more niche podcast, okay, I will go and listen to that because a friend that I trust has said that to me. Something that just pops up on my timeline, I will never click on it. Like, again, I automatically turn off people's retweets when I follow them because I don't care what they're retweeting. I'm following them because of who they are and what they are creating. Basically, I don't want to see retweets of things that, I'm sounding like a bit of a dickhead here because especially in the independent podcast scene, it's massive, but it does not compute to listens, basically, and that's what you want. Surely you want more listeners, not more followers.
And I think I'm by no means anybody significant, but I do talk to a lot of podcasters, right? Dozens may DM me a day just asking questions just because of what I'm doing. And a lot of them, new ones, smaller ones, well, they may even have more followers than long-term memory per se, but they under the impression, though, that the more followers you have, the more listens you have. That's a rabbit hole you can go down. So I think that's good that you address that, because I do honestly see that, Jack. People ask me, how many listens do you think this has? Because they might have 3,000 followers. It's a misconception for sure.
Yeah. I've seen podcasts with 8,000 followers on Twitter and they've got 2 patrons. You know, it's just not the two things should be completely separated if you have a realistic view on how to grow your listenership. And that's why Captivate, like, I know we're sponsored by Captivate for the podcast awards, and I use Captivate as a host, but they're a little bit different. They've got growth labs. Mark, you've spoke to Mark. People will have listened to your interview with him before they listen to us. They've actually got independent podcasters at heart and what to do to actually grow your podcast. Like, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to spending money in Facebook ads, if you want to do that, when it comes to repurposing your content, when it comes to making your website better. These are the things that increase your listenership. These are the things. What is not on Captivate Growth Labs is how do you get 10,000 Twitter followers? Because nobody cares.
No, and that's why when we talk about Captivate, I do on my show and you do on yours, it's because we genuinely believe in it, and it is a personable thing, and it is a growth tool.
It is, yes.
Absolutely. Oh man, no. And and yeah, I know you get into those notifications as well. So you talked about some of the things on social media that are not benefiting a podcast. So what would your advice be? What are things people can do? What's worked for you?
Yeah, I've been on my high horse for the last 10 minutes, Jeff. I think if you can, you should have your own website with your own sort of podcast name, just so that if people do find you, they can go back there to your website. Although
you're not talking about a link tree either, just to verify. You're talking about an actual website.
Yeah, like we've got wrongtermmemory.com, quitethingmedia.com, what does SMH mean.com. We've got websites for that. At the beginning, the website traffic might not be great. You can look into your analytics, but I just think over time it gives you a social proof as well, which I think not just in podcasting or marketing or the networking world, but that little bit of social proof, that feedback. Like if you've got a contact form, for example, ask for feedback. Get people to get in contact with you and say, I didn't like that episode where you spoke about the Nazis. I didn't like that episode where you spoke about X, Y, and Z. You've got to take that negative feedback. Don't take it to heart, because people like different things. Like I said, don't take it to heart, but take it on board and go, right, okay, that didn't work. Also, look at your consumption rate. It's probably my favourite podcasting stat, which is basically how much of your episode are people listening to. So you might have 100 people downloading your episode, but they're only listening to 30% of it. So they're turning off, or they're just not listening to it at all. Look at those consumption rates, and then maybe even listen back to what you were doing in that episode and what kept people engaged. Because if people are engaged, then they are more likely to share that through word of mouth and recommend it to a personal friend. Like if you listen to a podcast for 10 minutes and turn it off, you're not telling somebody about that specific podcast. If you listen to a podcast all the way through, you're engaged. You might go like that to your friend. Oh, listen to that podcast about I keep talking about the Nazis, but listen to the podcast about the Nazis that Jack, Jeff, and Colin done. And I think podcast consumption is probably a stat that is overlooked. Like having raw download numbers is cool, but how much of your episode are people actually listening to, and what did you do to get them to listen all the way through, and then try and recreate that? And the more you recreate that, the more that people might share your content on a more functional and better level than just retweeting it or just hashtag FFing
it. Had to throw that in again, didn't you? No, I think that's a great. No, that's great. It's a great concept that I think they can go to a lot more things than just podcasting. So you're talking consumption. Downloads are great, right? You have a long-term memory. If you're going to get 500 to 600 people listening to it, and your consumption rate is above or around 75%, that's better than 1,000 with a 15%.
Our consumption rate is about 80-85%, which is people are engaged with the content that we are creating, and we are steadily but surely growing in that. We tried feed drops, which is another thing, right? So we put the UFO podcast, which is one of the biggest podcasts on our network and one of the biggest podcasts in that niche. It gets, let's say, 25,000 listens, right? I don't know how many it gets, but we put that out in long-term memory. The consumption rate was 4% because people just turned it off because they're not listening to that. So that sort of consistency in what you're doing and what keeps listeners engaged is important in my eyes. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a podcast guru. I don't claim to be, but that's what I think anyway.
Great. It's great advice.
The thing with downloads is somebody might have listened to one episode and clicked subscribe, and then it just automatically downloads. and they never listen. So, like I says, that's the most important one in my eyes.
Last question for you. And this, I was asked this in a Q&A on my first couple weeks on Twitter. I want to get your opinion on it because we were joking the other day about the podcast promoters, right? And I got to thinking about a question I was asked a while back on Twitter. It was, what, in your opinion, is worse? People buying ratings or all of their ratings come from other podcasters? On like an iTunes, for example, I believe is what the lady was asking me.
Like, my first instinct is to say paying for ratings would
same
be
here.
worse. Yeah, that would be my first instinct. But asking if you're doing like review for review or whatever, it was maybe more pertinent a few years ago. I think when the Apple algorithm, because I'll be honest with you, like half of podcast listeners use Apple Podcasts, so that is where the majority of your listeners are going to come from. Their new and noteworthy section, etc., used to, as far as I know, really lean on ratings and reviews, because we really pushed it at the beginning of long-term memory, because that's what I thought you needed to do as a podcaster, and over time, pretty lucky, managed to get 130, 140 reviews, basically, and 5-star ratings. But it never really got us anywhere. It didn't get us into the new and noteworthy. And that's the only reason that I pushed it at the beginning of the show, because I thought it meant something. I thought that getting these 5-star reviews would somehow get you into charts, get you in front of people. And it is nice. It is a little bit of social proof having that many reviews compared to a lot of podcasts, but it doesn't really do much for you. It doesn't boost your listenership. And if these reviews are paid for, what the are you doing? Don't do that. And if it is review for review, yeah, there's no value in it. There's no.
Do you go and read? It's part two of the question was, do you read the reviews before you listen to a podcast?
No. Worry about your content. Worry about like what people are listening to. Try and create a space off of Twitter where people can give you feedback. The thing is, when you're asking for feedback, a lot of the time you're going to get positive feedback because you've asked for it. You know, whereas if you just leave a contact form there without pushing people to get in contact, they might feel more comfortable, especially if it's anonymous as well. Like if somebody on Twitter gets in contact with you, like if I was to get in contact with anybody, yourself, and I send you a DM and say that episode you had with X, Y, or Z was rubbish, in my opinion, I'm not going to do that, because that's not a nice thing to do.
Yeah.
So giving people a space to anonymously maybe get in contact is something that, again, you might not like, the feedback that you get. Like, I've been called woke. You're far too woke. You shouldn't be saying that. Like, I don't agree with what you're saying. Like, that's the sort of feedback that we've got on the anonymous side of things. And although I don't take that into account when it's obviously a bit of a dickhead that just disagrees with an opinion, but there have been some people get back to us and said, look, that bit didn't particularly work. But I don't know who they are, but I did take it on board because firstly it was anonymous, so they feel comfortable doing it. And secondly, they've took their time out to sort of tell you what they don't like. You've got to listen to it. You can't just gobble up the positive praise, the shares, X, Y, and Z. You can't just gobble that up as if it actually means something. You need to take the negative stuff on board, unless it's completely
irrelevant
off the scale. Yeah. And like the guy that got in contact calling us woke in inverted commas was obviously a bit of a dickhead, because like what he disagreed with that we were saying on the podcast was clearly something that was just 99% of people's opinion. He was obviously very much, let's call him a dead racist. Like, he was a horrible basically. Like, sorry for swearing again, but like, ignore that. But when it's actual feedback on your content and the parts of the sections that you're doing, sort of take that on board and don't take it too personally, basically.
And I asked you that because I'm obviously much more positively engaged with Twitter than you are. really deep involved in the indie podcast community, but I wanted to hear the thoughts of somebody who is involved in Twitter and doesn't have anything against it, but is not so much as into the social aspect of it.
Yeah, like we've got quite a thing, media.com. We're still a podcast network for independent creators, and that is not going to change anytime soon. And that is why we decided to run the awards. Basically, was to try and shine a little bit of a light on the people that take time out of their day, night. Everybody's working full-time jobs, basically, and doing this over and above it. We wanted to shine a little bit of a light on that, get eyes on that, and that was something that I really wanted to do from the start. Moving forward as a network, we may need to focus a little bit more on the listeners and the audience rather than the independent podcast world that is very much, like we've mentioned, a little bit incestuous at times, and everybody follows everybody else, and it's not beneficial to growth. But I give a shout out to all the people that take their time out and produce good content, because without it, we wouldn't have a podcast network. We wouldn't have a podcast awards, basically. So everybody that does that gets a high five from me. Basically, keep doing what you're doing, but maybe refocus on some of the things that basically I think are more important. So just ignore me. I don't care.
This will be coming out just literally a couple days before the award ceremony. So I do want to give you a minute to plug that, because I do think it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, so we've got 8 podcast categories, and we will be going live on YouTube premiere on the 31st of July, which is a Saturday at 9 p.m. GMT. So depending on where you are, if you're in America, I'd imagine that's sort of between 2 p.m. and sort of 6 p.m. We decided to go then because we thought that it's a Saturday, people are off. If they want to come along, watch the awards, that will be cool. We have got a keynote speech type idea from Mark from Captivate. We've got JJ from Good Pods. We've got Matchmaker. We've got Squadcast, all sort of there and involved. There will be prizes given out to winners, but there's also going to be a raffle, basically. So you can win a Squadcast 3-month for free. You can win an Awesome Pros. They design, they're graphic designers, so they'll be able to work in your artwork. And we've also got a 90-day Captivate free hosting package as well. So if you attend, there's a chance to win a prize. There's a chance to have a laugh at me and Colin trying to present a podcast awards. You're going to be there as well, mate. You're going to be presenting the music awards. We've got cold callers. We've got music videos. There's tons of stuff going on. It's not just a Zoom call. It's not just like one guy talking at the camera. There's going to be lots of different content, and it's not going to be too long. We're talking maybe 90 minutes at the most out of your time to pop along and have a good time, win a prize, see me in real life, see Jeff in real life, X, Y, and Z. So looking forward to it, and hopefully it is a success. I'd imagine that the link to the tickets will be in the show description, Jeff.
Yep.
Tickets are free, man. Like, I'm not asking you to pay to come and watch a bunch of people that you don't know, basically. So they're free. Come along, take a wee look. If you don't enjoy it, leave. Like, it didn't cost you anything. But if you do enjoy it, yeah, hopefully you will.
Yeah, we'll definitely get it in the show description, and I do encourage everybody to check it out. We talk about support. You want to support content creators, especially at the independent level. This is a great opportunity to get involved, get your free ticket via online, and check it out on the 31st. And we'll have all the information in the show notes. Dude, I could talk to you all day, like I said, man, but I'll let you get back to what you're doing. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview today.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, Jeff. Like, normally I'm interviewing people, so it's nice to be on the flip side, basically. I do apologise if I got in my high horse too much. And if you don't agree with what I'm saying, get in contact at QTT Media.
Basically, if you have a Podlift tweet going on, you need to add Jack Shaw to it.
Yeah, don't do that. I'll block you.
All right, man. Thanks. Really do appreciate you listening to this episode and checking it out. I hope you continue to do so with the next. I hope you have an appreciation for what I'm trying to do here, highlight all the different things all sorts of different creators are doing. I hope you get behind me on that and continue to join me on my journey. I'm Podcast Father, the Indie Podcaster. See you next time.